بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ثم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has advised us to have two important and very powerful tools in our lives. And if we have them, we're going to see our problems get solved, our difficulties getting away. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward us the best of the rewards in this world as well as in the hereafter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned in the Quran, He said, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. He said, seek help through patience and prayer. Indeed, it is hard, except for the humble ones. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first thing that He has advised us to have in our lives in order for us to be able to get help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being patient. Being patient is something that is not easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said to us that be patient. This means that being patient in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in fulfilling the obligations Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He has put upon us. And being patient also, it means to refrain from the disobedience. It means staying away from all of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He has forbidden us in our lives altogether. Having patience, it means to accept also the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When something happens, a tragedy, or when something that is not good or causes pain happens in our life, to accept that this is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to avoid becoming angry and discontent with it. This is also part of being patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, be patient when you are in problems, when you are in difficulties. Be patient, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to grant you the best. You're going to see the best of the outcomes out of this in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world as well as in the hereafter. And it is something that if we are going to practice it, we are going to training on ourselves, inshallah, we're going to find it that is going to be easier as we keep going. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, be patient while you're seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're going to find the best outcome in your life. The second thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He has advised us to have is to observe the prayer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, not only being patient but also observe the prayer. You find out most of the time that people, when they are facing difficulties, people when they are in problems, they forget to pray in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They forget their salah. And this is something that we find it in most of the time. For example, when somebody passes away in your family or somebody who is very close, you find that people in some of these cases, they forget to pray. Or they keep mourning, but they forget to pray in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, seek help in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being patient and observe the prayer. Indeed, prayer, it has been established to bridge the gap of communication between the believer and his creator, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, observe the prayer. Do not abandon the prayer. Observe the prayer when you are in difficulties, when you have problems in your life, when you're facing different kind of tragedies in your life. Be patient and observe the prayer. Even though the prayer, it is something that is not easy. وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, this prayer is not easy to observe except for those who are humble, those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who have hope in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned about the people who are humbled, people who the prayer will be easier for them to observe, or any other worshipping deed, it would be easier for them to observe. Who are these people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned them. He said, الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. He said, those who are certain that they are going to meet their Lord and that to Him they will return. These are the people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, except for these people, these are the people whom the worshipping deeds are going to be easier for them. people who have fear, hope, people who are certain that they are going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they know that they are going to face their accountability in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. These are the people whom the worshipping deeds will be easier for them to observe in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us in our lives, in different moments, in different situations in our lives. We shouldn't forget to do these two things. These are the most important tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He has given them. What are these? This is the patience and the salah, the prayer in our life. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us patient. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among of those who are serious in observing our prayers. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to the truth. Jazakumullah khairan. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.